Okay. You have your journals open. Lower your screens. My goal is to get through these. Who cares? My goal is to get through them reasonably quickly. What is your homework? Your homework is not to read those Analects and not to, please, 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 when I'm talking, please don't chatter because you're not hearing me. Your test, Shang and Joe, instructions and guide on there. You've had it for a week. You have no homework other than to be ready for that test on Thursday or Friday for you B people tomorrow, which when you're listening to it will be today. Because B period's going to listen to this. Oh, kill me. All right, so simply put, though, after your test, your homework is, after your test over the weekend, to actually read hand-picked Analects from Confucius, all right? Why hand-picked? Because the book itself is quite, not horribly long, but it's 22 chapters, and each of those chapters is a good 5 pages. And so these Analects that I chose for you, and please now hear me and focus. You're about to, probably for the first time, experience definitely one of my 5 favorite books in a lifetime of reading. From probably my first favorite man, although Zhuangzi, who you'll read afterwards, of Taoism, who I call Jesus doing stand-up comedy, or in saucier moods, Jesus on acid. Because he is bizarre, Zhuangzi, the second Taoist, not Lao Tzu, but Zhuangzi, Master Chuang. The Taoists are completely, so I love both of them. I love Confucius and I love Zhuangzi. They're probably my 2 favorite human beings ever to have lived, and my best friends, despite the fact that they've been dead for 2,500 years. I know them well. I visited Confucius twice. We went to Chufu, and I went to his grave. I love that man. I read him twice a year, and every time I read him, it is better, not worse. It's not boring. It's deeper, and it makes me a better person. Straight out, I am a much better person because I read the Analects twice a year. It has nothing to do with religion at all. It has to do with being decent and considerate and remembering how beautiful everything is and all sorts of incredible things, and like having a high standard for what a human being is. That's what he does. He's a humanist, as we've said a million times. Simon Leys, a Dutch translator, a Dutchman who translated this into English. This is the copy. I have this if anybody wants to borrow it. And I chose this. I've read a million different translations of Confucius because they all, word choice, translation choice is almost, it changes the meaning, right? Translation changes the meaning of the original. And so it's interesting to read different translations. I chose Leys because his is most readable. It's very, very sort of like it's easy. And it's quite literary. It's quite nice. But Leys said this, and I say this to my Chinese students. It's easier for a Westerner to see the value of Confucianism than it is for a Chinese to see the value of Confucianism. Why? Because the Chinese just grew up with Confucianism. Mrs. Freeman, who is Chelsea Faircloth's helper here, Chinese woman, married to a Westerner, I guess that's why her name is Tong Freeman. So, and she told me last class. She said, do you have copies of the what, guys? She said, not related to Claire, obviously. Is she? Yeah. Is that your mom? Yeah. So interesting. Why didn't she tell me, and why didn't you tell me? Jeez. So she came up to me and she said, do you have copies of the Analects? And I was like, no. I was like, no. I was like, obviously, yeah. And she was like, can I borrow them? And I was like, yeah. And she said, I've never read Confucius. She's Chinese. And I said, well, that's weird. She's like, I love the Tao Te Ching. Most Chinese do. They love Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. It's 88 poems, and they're gorgeous and deep, and you can read them forever and still feel like there's just another, there's so many depths there. It's so ambiguous. So the Chinese love Lao Tzu. They love the Tao Te Ching. But Confucius, as Claire's mom said, I never read him because I just always considered him too restrictive, too old-fashioned, too oppressive. And so there's nothing there for us modern people. But she's curious now, and so I gave her 2 translations. But Leys himself says in the introduction to the book that it's easier for us Westerners because we see Confucius without the baggage that the Chinese see. When the Qing dynasty fell, all the Chinese people turned against Confucianism. It would be kind of like when Galileo and the scientific revolution proved so much of the Bible wrong that a lot of people turned against Christianity, right? And they just said, I don't believe this stuff anymore. It's retarded us. It hasn't helped us. Well, in the same way, Chinese had this reaction against Confucius. He retarded us. He didn't help us. And so we need to modernize, and Confucius is like old-fashioned and bad to the Chinese, to many of them. But even the Chinese themselves now are starting to go, you know what, we have become empty inside because now we just like work, shop, and cheat each other, and we're not the beautiful civilization we used to be. And so there is a resurgence of Confucianism. It's coming back. This would be like a big wave of Christianity coming back in Europe or something where less than 50% of the population is Christian. So this is an incredibly, incredibly interesting book, and I hope you enjoy it. That's all. So to pre-read the book, these are the sort of operative terms. First of all, this term "zhen." Those of you who speak Chinese, you know that this character, the leaning left component, is the helping the left side. What does it mean? Person, right? And then you know that the right character in this combined character is the number 2. And so if you think about that, it's been sort of interpreted, it's been analyzed, and it's a very interesting thing. So you've got man, or human, person, and then the number 2 combined. And so what do we see out of this? It is so interesting to read people try to turn these very Chinese, otherworldly terms, Planet China terms, into English. I think in Laza's it's either humaneness or goodness. What horribly, horribly sort of thin terms. To be humane, that's pretty good. To have a human heart. But this is what other translators, have come up with. Co-humanity. And you see that in person and 2. A human to more than 1, not a human to the number 1, because that would be just one relationship, a pair, but a human to 2, that means more than 1. So my relation to all, my human-heartedness in relation to all other humans. To make a provocative and very, very useful contrast with the West, again, in the West, where does our heart go? It goes up, because that's where God, heaven, and Jesus are. And so the heart goes up above all. And yes, love your neighbor and all that sort of thing, but above all, the first commandment, love nobody like God, right? In China, 1 to more than 1. Human to all of the humans. The energy goes horizontally, not vertically. To each and every one. So this is the Confucian ideal. Zhen is the Confucian ideal. What is the highest level of perfection of a human being? What is the best we can be? To develop that, to cultivate that in ourselves. Zhen. So you will hear, okay, so co-humanity, that's one. Roger Ames, who we talked about last class, the scholar from University of Hawaii, who said, let's read text together. And so Taka and I and Asian Lit read text together about Confucianism. He came up with this term. He's a beautiful translator. Relational virtuosity. And as I say here, to be a virtuoso is to be such a master at something that you blow people away. Look at this violin virtuoso. They are incredible. Ames is such a beautiful translator because he sees Confucianism as actually trying to create individual human beings as a norm in society who are virtuosos in their interactions and relations with other people. This is humanism that puts the Greeks to shame in terms of its focus on just how well we can interact, interrelate, and live together as a race, live together as a society. Sorry. Second term, I think I previewed this with you last time. Junzi, I don't have the Chinese for it, but in any case, gentlemen. Simply put, it used to mean aristocrat. Watch what Confucius does with it in this age of corrupt aristocrats. In connection, Now, I'm asking you to do a forum at the end of this, the last 5 minutes of this, in which I want you to play with these types of things. The rectification of names. Confucius actually had a language agenda. Part of the Confucian mission in this horrible time of anarchy and chaos and bloodshed and just filth was to correct our language, because our language has become incorrect. Words that the meanings of words have been perverted. And so the children now are learning words, and the definitions and the understandings of these words are perverted and therefore perverting the youth. And so his agenda was to correct our definitions of perverted words so that our society can be unpolluted by actually rectifying, correcting the names. So the rectification of names is a language thing. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to ask you, because I see relevance about that. I walk around and I see this stuff. I'm like a walking Confucian filter. I go through my daily days, talking to my parents, interacting with my students, walking down the street. And I see Confucian connections everywhere. His analysis of a sick society certainly is not limited to the Warring States period. Can you see do any words come to your mind of names that need rectifying? And by names, we mean words, language. Are there any words that we use whose meanings in popular conversation, normal conversations, have become so perverted, so corrupt, that it's just like, how did we get to this place? Thank you, Tegan. Say more. That's interesting. Say more.
It's used quite liberally now, like anything that's kind of creative or someone that's slightly smarter is now used as genius rather than.
Okay, I hear you talking about a lowering of standards for being deserving to be called genius. Okay, notice that's not a perversion so much as just a lowering of standards. But thank you for starting the conversation. I think Confucius would agree with you. Your hand was up next, David.
Literal. The word literal. We've used the word literal so much that no longer means literal. It actually changed in the dictionary.
I was literally freezing to death.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now I'm gonna push you to think. Confucius would say that's sloppy. As an English teacher, I would say that's sloppy and unfortunate. But when we're talking about society becoming corrupted through certain terms, notice we're getting into a different area and a different depth here. Can anybody think of any words whose common usage now is actually one that, on the contrary, that actually threatens like the decency of society? She was next.
I think anarchy, because like isn't like the root of anarchy just like full government to govern, like it's like equal. It like focuses on equality.
Yeah.
No formal government. But nowadays, when you hear of anarchy, you think of like automatic chaos.
Chaos and yeah. Okay. So the political concept. I hear that. How is that going to pervert society, though?
Because like for example, I know someone who calls himself an anarchist because he doesn't believe formal government is the best way.
Mm-hmm.
However, when people hear that, they assume like he's gonna go and riot everywhere and like throw bombs everywhere and stuff like that.
I hope you're listening, those of you who I hope you're all listening, and I hope all of you, even if you don't like being in school, I hope you realize that this is an interesting conversation. At first, I was not particularly pleased by what you said, but then I thought, you know what, but maybe I'm not listening well enough, because there are so many political words. Patriotism, for example, which can mean, depending on how we mean patriotism, it could mean hating foreigners and all sorts of things, right? It could mean loving to go to war because USA number one, whatever, right? And so there are, or whatever, Korea number one, whatever, right? There are political terms whose corruption or perversion could lead to a society becoming sicker. Can we put it? Okay, I'll just keep listening. Yeah.
Gay.
Gay. Say more.
That's like becomes synonymous with like lame, and it's actually not that. It's just negative. Yeah, anything negative.
And at the same time, it's a way of like, that would like be like, say, I don't know, like the word jock oh, that's so jock, right? And by jock we mean lame, right? And so it's a way to attack a person by like using a description of them. I see two more hands very quickly. I saw Evan. Was yours up? Yeah. Huh? Fuck. It's not often I get to say fuck in the classroom without going oops afterwards, which does occasionally happen when I get too passionate about things. Once it was slow motion, I was talking about something. I was like, it didn't. Everything slowed down. I was like, oh no, it's coming out of my mouth. I was like, whoops. Well, that's what happens when I get too passionate, I said, and off we went. And students were like, we don't care. One was like, I do, and I'm going home to tell Mom. And then Mom like, Dr. Stewart, Mr. Burrell, like threatened the soul of my daughter. Why fuck?
It used to connotate sex. Now it's just, pretty much any time you want to add, emphasis.
Okay, all right. Monica?
Pretty much like anything that you were suffering or like mental disease and stuff, because you say like, oh, that's so retarded. And like, oh, I'm starving to death, like I'm starving, or I'm like stuff like that. Like we kind of like don't like we kind of take away from how important these issues actually are. Like you're kind of like making a mockery of them.
Yes.
So,
yes, I hear you. To use words and by using them make a mockery of like what's really serious, cheapen the idea and make people desensitize them to the seriousness of things. But what's funny, here are some words that I would throw into the mix. Success or successful. Anybody want to volley that one back with me? I claim it's been the meaning of the term successful has been perverted and is perverting our youth. Now, a new voice, no behind.
I think a lot of people see being successful as having a lot of money or like doing well in their job, whether instead of being happy.
Yeah, well, there you go, right? And on. Wealth. It's now the number of zeros in your bank account, or as opposed to, I don't know, what you can do that can't be bought with money, like possibly play an instrument or write a poem or sing or I don't know, whatever. But anyway, cool often describes people who are absolute dicks. And yet it's a compliment. Oh, you are really insensitive. You're really asinine. You're really barbaric, but somehow entertaining. And so you're cool. You're really antisocial and sociopathic. How cool, right? So the language has been, so this is the kind of thing that Confucius is tackling in his own time. Now, so what is the most important, the highest quality, the highest level a human being can attain? To be virtuosically relational or optimally human? Ren? Okay. Li, ritual. Everything from the ceremonial to the, I'm not going to sit on that mat because it's not straight, which he did refuse to do. He would not sit on a mat on the floor if it was not straight. Just like the ancestors, you've arranged the baskets. We are pleased. You've done everything without error, including placing the mats, the seating mats on the floors. They didn't sit in chairs back then, you notice. They sat on mats, right? Chairs happened in the Song Dynasty. Maybe the Tang, I don't remember. So here's a beautiful question that we all still try to get our heads around even after 5 years and a good 20 reads of the Analects, cover to cover, different translations, obsessively annotating constantly out of pure love. The claim is that the practice of ritual is what leads to, develops in a person, the optimal human level of perfection. Ren. Ritual leads to and produces a person with Ren. Ask yourself, as you read, if you can get your head around that. when we get to the Dao De Jing, De, virtue it's called, but when you think of how Shun changed people through his goodness, virtue, goodness, not writing a word, goodness, good behavior that changes other people, that's the concept of De. And so all of these people, and again, our idea of role model is, as that says, a really thin, pointing in that direction. Oh, Yue, music. So Li and Yue, music and ritual, are often spoken of in one phrase. Li and Yue, ritual and music. And then finally, is this finally? So one problem with using outlines, yeah. Okay, the last one. East-West comparison. Role ethics. To be a moral person in China is not to be a person at all, because it's not about self, it's not about soul, it's not about individual. You can't be a good individual. I repeat that for those of you who need to hear it a second time to understand it's worth writing down. You can't be a good individual, full stop, in Confucianism. Because good by definition is, are you good in all of the roles that you participate in relationally every moment, except when you're alone? What roles are those? I am a son to my parents. I'm a sibling, a brother to my sisters and my brother. I'm a husband to my wife. I'm a teacher to my students. And in all those roles, I have to be good and accomplished and virtuosic at each of those roles to be a good person. Much, much, much is being, there's so much interest in that in the modern world. Give me one more minute. In the same way, don't pack. I'm sorry, give me one more minute. In the same way, notice that you right now have your set of roles too. And so if you were a Confucian, or if you lived in a Confucian culture, you would be judged by how well you were a son, by how well you were a daughter, by how well you were a student, by how well you were a sibling, on and on and on. Each one of your roles. And so the idea to be a self-cultivated and excellent human was, am I performing, enacting all of these roles well with my heart and with discipline and focus? It is role ethics, not human ethics, role ethics. The self is the combination of roles that defines who you are. And notice as you go through life, your roles change. My mother's going to die soon. I'm no longer going to be a son. You're going to become married and parents. And so your roles change. And so the good person is the person who has gone through all the roles from child to the grave and performed all those roles well. Notice it has nothing to do with faith, nothing to do with anything up there. It has everything to do, over and over again, with relationships. So you got your test next time. I urge you to review this before you start reading your Confucianism packets. Just review those terms because it will make the experience of